We think of modern agriculture as advanced, sophisticated, and efficient. But what if our ancestors knew planting secrets that could keep you fed when everything else fails? Before hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, or industrial farming, people developed techniques so powerful they could grow food in the worst conditions imaginable. Methods that worked without electricity, without stores, without any of the systems we depend on today. In this video, you'll discover 7 forgotten planting skills that modern preppers have completely overlooked. Techniques so effective they could mean the difference between abundance and starvation when society breaks down. And by the end, you'll understand why our great-grandparents were more food secure than we are today, despite having none of our technology. These aren't just gardening tips. They're survival systems that have been tested through famines, wars, and disasters. Skills that could save your family when modern agriculture collapses. Number 1. Companion planting networks. The forgotten food web. Today we plant in rows. Neat, organized, separated by type. But our ancestors understood something we've lost completely. Plants aren't meant to grow alone. They're designed to work together in complex networks that boost yields, fight pests, and create resilient growing systems without any external inputs. This wasn't just randomly throwing seeds together. It was sophisticated agricultural engineering using living partnerships. The Three Sisters technique from Native American farmers created a perfect example of this forgotten wisdom. Corn provided structure for beans to climb. Beans fixed nitrogen in the soil to feed the corn and squash. Squash spread across the ground, shading roots and preventing weeds, while its prickly leaves deterred pests. 3 plants working as one system, each making the others stronger. But this was just the beginning. Experienced growers developed companion networks with dozens of plants, each serving multiple purposes. Marigolds weren't just flowers. They were pest control systems that protected nearby vegetables. Nasturtiums acted as trap crops, drawing harmful insects away from food plants while providing edible flowers and leaves. Herbs like basil and oregano didn't just season food. They created chemical barriers that confused pests and improved the flavor of neighboring plants. The most sophisticated practitioners created what modern permaculture calls guilds. Apple trees anchored these systems, providing fruit and structure. Below them, nitrogen-fixing shrubs like gumi or elaeagnus fed the soil. Ground covers like wild strawberries or mint prevented weeds and provided additional food. Climbing vines used the tree for support while contributing their own harvest. Even the insects were managed through plant selection. Flowers that bloomed at different times ensured beneficial insects had food sources always. Plants with different root depths accessed nutrients at various soil levels, preventing competition and maximizing soil use. Nothing was wasted. Every plant had multiple functions. The result was a food system that required minimal maintenance while producing abundant harvests year after year. Modern monoculture farming fights against nature. These companion networks worked with natural processes, creating stability through diversity. When one plant struggled, others compensated. When pests attacked one species, beneficial insects from companion plants provided control. Weather extremes that devastated single crops barely affected these integrated systems. Number 2. Seed-saving mastery, the ultimate insurance policy. We buy seeds every season from companies that didn't exist 50 years ago. But our ancestors understood that true food security comes from controlling your own seed supply. They developed techniques for selecting, saving, and storing seeds that created varieties perfectly adapted to local conditions. Varieties that often outperformed anything you could buy today. This wasn't simple seed collection. It was genetic engineering using observation, selection, and time. Master seed savers didn't just save seeds from their best plants. They understood plant genetics enough to improve their varieties generation after generation. The process started with selection, not the biggest plant or the earliest harvest, but the plant that performed best under stress. The tomato that produced when others failed. The bean that resisted disease. The corn that survived drought. These were the parents of next year's crop. Seeds from these survivors carried genetic information about thriving in difficult conditions. Each generation became more adapted to local soil, climate, and growing conditions. After decades, these varieties became perfectly suited to their specific environment in ways that commercial seeds never could match. Storage techniques ensured seeds remained viable for years, sometimes decades. Seeds were dried to exact moisture levels, stored in containers with natural preservatives like diatomaceous earth or wood ash, and kept in locations with stable temperatures. Some families maintained seed stocks that remained viable for over 20 years. The most advanced practitioners practiced what we now call population breeding. Instead of selecting individual plants, they would allow their best performers to cross-pollinate naturally, creating diverse populations with broad genetic resistance to diseases and environmental stress. This created varieties that were virtually impossible to wipe out because they contained so much genetic diversity. Trading networks shared these improved varieties between communities. A drought-resistant corn variety developed in one region might be traded for disease-resistant beans from another area. This constant exchange created a vast genetic library distributed across thousands of farms and gardens. Each variety was a treasure trove of genetic information developed through generations of careful selection. Modern hybrid seeds can't be saved because they don't breed true. Our ancestors' open-pollinated varieties improved with each generation, becoming more valuable over time rather than less. These weren't just seeds. They were genetic libraries containing centuries of agricultural wisdom encoded in DNA. Number 3. Soil building without inputs. The foundation of everything. Modern agriculture depends on constant inputs: fertilizers, amendments, chemicals, and imported organic matter. But traditional farmers created rich, productive soil using nothing but what was already on their land. They understood soil as a living system that could be enhanced through specific techniques rather than external additions. The foundation was understanding soil biology. Healthy soil wasn't just dirt. It was a complex ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, worms, and countless microorganisms working together to make nutrients available to plants. Traditional farmers knew how to feed this ecosystem without buying anything. Composting went far beyond kitchen scraps. Everything organic was systematically recycled. Crop residues, animal manures, fallen leaves, pond weeds, and even human waste were carefully composted using techniques that created perfect growing medium while eliminating pathogens. The process was precise. Ratios of carbon to nitrogen were balanced instinctively. Temperature and moisture were managed to ensure proper decomposition. The result was finished compost that contained not just nutrients, but beneficial microorganisms that improved soil structure and plant health. Cover cropping prevented soil erosion while adding organic matter and nutrients. Legumes like clover and vetch fixed nitrogen from the air. Deep-rooted plants like daikon radishes broke up compacted soil layers and brought nutrients from deep in the earth to the surface. Buckwheat suppressed weeds and added organic matter when turned under. These weren't random plantings. They were carefully planned sequences that built soil fertility over time. Green manure crops were grown specifically to be turned into the soil before maturity. These living fertilizer factories captured solar energy and converted it into organic matter and nutrients. A single season of green manures could add as much organic matter and nitrogen as years of purchased fertilizers. The most sophisticated systems used what we now call crop rotation to manage soil fertility. Nitrogen-fixing legumes were followed by heavy-feeding crops like corn or cabbage. Root vegetables like carrots followed leafy crops to access nutrients at different soil depths. This rotation prevented soil depletion while maintaining high productivity without any external inputs. Number 4. Weather prediction through nature. When survival depends on timing. Modern farmers check weather apps and satellite forecasts, but our ancestors read signs in nature that predicted weather changes days or even weeks in advance. Signs that were often more accurate than modern meteorology for local conditions. This knowledge meant the difference between a successful harvest and complete crop failure. Traditional weather prediction wasn't superstition. It was careful observation of natural patterns refined over generations. Plants, animals, and atmospheric conditions all provided information about coming weather changes. Experienced farmers could predict frost dates, rainfall patterns, and seasonal variations with remarkable accuracy. Animal behavior provided the earliest warnings. Cattle gathering in groups and lying down indicated rain within hours. Birds flying lower than usual suggested approaching storms. Spiders abandoning their webs meant severe weather was coming. Even insects provided clues. Ants building higher mounds predicted unusually wet seasons. Plant signs were equally revealing. Oak trees dropping acorns early warned of harsh winters ahead. Dandelions closing their flowers during clear skies meant rain was approaching within 24 hours. When tree leaves showed their undersides, storms were inevitable. Thick corn husks indicated severe winter weather was coming. These weren't random observations, but consistent patterns that helped farmers time their planting, harvesting, and preservation activities. Atmospheric signs provided the most immediate forecasts. Red skies at night really did predict fair weather the following day, because high-pressure systems moving from west to east created those conditions. Ring around the moon indicated rain within 48 hours, as ice crystals in high clouds refracted light. Heavy dew in the morning meant clear weather would continue. Smoke from fires that hung low and didn't rise warned of approaching low-pressure systems bringing storms. The most skilled weather readers combined multiple signs to create detailed forecasts. They understood that nature provided redundant information. One sign might be wrong, but when multiple indicators agreed, the forecast became extremely reliable. This knowledge allowed them to plant at optimal times, harvest before damaging weather, and protect crops when necessary. Number 5. Wild food integration. The hidden harvest. Modern preppers focus on growing domestic crops. But our ancestors understood that true food security comes from integrating wild foods into their growing systems. They didn't just forage randomly, they actively managed wild food sources, creating semi-domestic systems that provided reliable harvests without cultivation. This was food forestry before the term existed. Wild foods provided nutrition that domestic crops couldn't match. Many wild greens contained higher levels of vitamins and minerals than cultivated vegetables. Wild berries, nuts, and roots offered diverse nutrition that prevented deficiency diseases common in grain-based diets. These foods also provided backup harvests when domestic crops failed due to weather, pests, or other disasters. Traditional farmers didn't just collect wild foods, they managed them. Nut trees were selectively pruned to increase production. Wild berry patches were cleared of competing vegetation and occasionally fertilized with compost. Useful wild plants were transplanted closer to homes and encouraged to spread in suitable locations. The forest edge was actively managed to create zones of useful plants. Some wild foods were semi-domesticated through selective harvesting. Jerusalem artichokes, ground nuts, and wild onions were harvested in ways that encouraged the best specimens to reproduce. Over generations, these populations became more productive and easier to process than their truly wild relatives. This created reliable food sources that required minimal maintenance but provided substantial harvests. The timing of wild food harvests was coordinated with domestic crop schedules. Spring greens filled the gap before garden vegetables matured. Summer berries provided fresh food during the growing season. Fall nuts and roots were harvested and stored for winter consumption. Wild foods extended the productive season and provided dietary diversity that domestic crops alone couldn't match. Knowledge of processing techniques transformed inedible wild plants into valuable food sources. Acorns required specific leaching processes to remove bitter tannins, but the resulting flour was nutritious and storable. Cattail roots needed careful preparation, but provided starch equivalent to potatoes. Even poisonous plants like pokeweed could be made safe and nutritious through proper processing methods. Number 6. Microclimate creation. Engineering perfect growing conditions. Modern gardeners accept whatever climate they have. But traditional farmers understood how to create favorable growing conditions, even in challenging environments. They modified temperature, moisture, and wind patterns using nothing but earthwork, stone placement, and strategic plantings. These techniques could extend growing seasons, protect crops from extreme weather, and create productive gardens in seemingly impossible locations. The foundation was understanding how landscape features affected local climate. South-facing slopes received more solar energy and stayed warmer longer into fall. Low areas collected cold air and experienced more frost damage. Wind patterns could be predicted based on topography and modified through barriers or channels. Water features moderated temperature and increased local humidity. Stone walls and rock piles weren't just field clearing. They were thermal mass systems that absorbed heat during warm days and released it slowly during cool nights. Strategically placed rocks could raise local temperatures by several degrees, extending the growing season for heat-loving crops. These thermal batteries required no energy input, but provided consistent climate modification. Terracing created level growing surfaces on slopes while managing water flow. But advanced terracing systems also created distinct microclimates at different elevations. Upper terraces stayed warmer and drier, suitable for Mediterranean crops. Lower terraces collected moisture and stayed cooler, perfect for crops requiring more water and moderate temperatures. A single hillside could support diverse growing zones through careful terrace design. Windbreaks protected crops from damaging winds while creating calmer, warmer growing conditions. But traditional windbreak design went beyond simple barriers. They created graduated protection using trees, shrubs, and tall crops arranged to slow wind gradually rather than stopping it abruptly. This prevented the turbulence that simple barriers created while providing maximum protection for the growing area. Water management created favorable moisture conditions without irrigation systems. Swales and berms directed rainwater to where it was needed most. Mulching conserved soil moisture while moderating soil temperature. Strategic placement of water barrels or small ponds increased local humidity and provided thermal mass that moderated temperature swings. Number 7. Preservation through living storage. Food that stays fresh without refrigeration. Modern food preservation relies on freezing, canning, and dehydration. But our ancestors developed systems that kept food fresh and nutritious for months using living storage techniques. Methods that required no energy, no special equipment, and often improved food quality over time rather than degrading it. Root cellars were engineered environments that maintained optimal temperature and humidity for different types of storage. But advanced root cellars were divided into zones with different conditions. Cool, humid areas kept root vegetables crisp for months. Slightly warmer, drier sections stored apples and other fruits. The coolest areas preserved meat and dairy products safely without refrigeration. Living storage went beyond simple cellars. Some vegetables could be kept alive and growing slowly throughout winter, providing fresh food when nothing else was available. Leeks, Brussels sprouts, and many root crops actually improved in flavor after exposure to light frost. These crops managed to continue growing slowly even in cold conditions, providing fresh food all winter long. Controlled atmosphere storage used natural processes to extend food storage life. Apples stored in containers with limited oxygen stayed fresh much longer than those exposed to normal air. This technique used the apple's own respiration to create ideal storage conditions. Root vegetables stored in barely moist sand or sawdust maintained perfect texture and nutrition for months. The most sophisticated preservation systems combined multiple techniques. Fruits were stored in controlled atmosphere conditions until they began to deteriorate, then processed into dried fruits or preserves. Vegetables were kept in living storage as long as possible, then processed using fermentation or other preservation methods. Nothing was wasted, and fresh food was available throughout the year. These techniques were not primitive. They were sophisticated systems that often preserved food quality better than modern methods while using no external energy sources. These living storage systems created what we might call biological refrigeration. Underground chambers maintained consistent temperatures year-round without any energy input. The Earth itself provided insulation and temperature regulation that modern refrigeration attempts to replicate using massive amounts of electricity. Traditional storage masters understood that different foods required different conditions, but they also knew how to create those conditions using natural materials and simple construction techniques. Potato storage required complete darkness and specific humidity levels. Grain storage needed protection from moisture and pests. Dairy products required the coolest possible conditions. Each requirement was met through careful design rather than mechanical systems. The most remarkable aspect of these preservation methods was their sustainability. A properly built root cellar could function for generations without maintenance. Storage techniques improved food quality rather than degrading it. Many fermented foods actually became more nutritious over time. These weren't just preservation methods. They were food enhancement systems that created better nutrition while extending storage life. What made these systems truly powerful was their integration. The same earthwork that created microclimates for growing also provided ideal storage conditions. Crops were selected not just for productivity, but for their storage characteristics. Varieties that kept well in living storage were preferred over those that produced higher yields but spoiled quickly. Every aspect of the food system worked together. Modern preppers often focus on stockpiling processed foods with long shelf lives. But these traditional methods offered something better. Fresh, nutritious food available throughout the year, using techniques that could be implemented anywhere with basic materials and knowledge. No supply chains, no industrial processing, no dependence on systems beyond local control. The genius wasn't in any single technique. It was in the integrated approach that turned every aspect of food production into a survival system. Companion planting networks created resilient growing systems. Seed saving developed varieties adapted to local conditions. Soil building eliminated dependence on external inputs. Weather prediction optimized timing for maximum success. Wild food integration provided backup harvests and nutritional diversity. Microclimate creation extended growing seasons and protected crops. Living storage preserved harvests without energy requirements. Each skill reinforced the others. Better soil produced healthier plants that saved better seeds. Improved varieties grew better in managed microclimates. Extended growing seasons provided more food for preservation systems. Wild foods supplemented domestic production during difficult years. Weather prediction optimized every decision from planting timing to harvest schedules. This wasn't primitive agriculture struggling against nature. It was sophisticated food production, working with natural systems to create abundance from minimal inputs. Our ancestors didn't just survive. They thrived using techniques that modern agriculture has abandoned in favor of energy-intensive systems dependent on global supply chains. These 7 forgotten skills represent thousands of years of human experience. Techniques refined through famine, war, and disaster. They embody true self-sufficiency, built on understanding rather than stockpiling. Our ancestors survived not because they had better tools, but because they knew how to work with nature instead of fighting against it. Today's threats, climate change, supply chain collapse, and economic instability, prove that technology alone can't guarantee food security. The solutions we need aren't new inventions. They're ancient methods waiting to be remembered. The question isn't whether these techniques still work. They do. The real question is whether we'll take the time to learn them before we have no choice. Real security doesn't come from equipment. It comes from knowledge, from observation, adaptation, and integration. Each of these skills, seed saving, companion planting, soil building, water harvesting, and more, creates a foundation of independence that no crisis can erase. These practices can transform vulnerability into resilience, from hoping nothing goes wrong to knowing you can thrive no matter what happens. The wisdom exists, the techniques work. The only variable left is you. The path forward isn't about abandoning modern life completely. It's about reclaiming the knowledge that made our ancestors truly self-sufficient. These 7 forgotten planting skills offer something no store-bought solution can provide. True food security that doesn't depend on systems beyond your control. The techniques work. The question isn't whether they're effective, it's whether you'll start learning them before you desperately need them. Because when supply chains fail and grocery stores empty, the people who understand these integrated growing systems won't just survive. They'll thrive while others struggle. Start small. Pick one skill and begin experimenting today. Your future self will thank you when these forgotten techniques become the difference between abundance and hunger. The knowledge exists. The methods are proven. Now it's up to you to master them.